Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, as it were. It is 12 o'clock noon. Welcome to our Innovator series of webinars at KCI. We are very happy to present transportation visualization for public involvement. And today we're going to hear from Cyrus McCall. And it is my privilege to introduce our speaker, Cyrus McCall. He is a trailblazer in the implementation of 3D modeling and visualization for planning, design, and construction projects. He's an absolute expert in this field, and I can't wait for you to hear from him about all of his expertise. If you happen to have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A in the chat, and we'll proceed with addressing those either during the presentation or at the end. And with that, I turn it over to Cyrus.
Thank you, Melissa. Really very happy to be here. I'm very excited to show projects that we've completed and talk about what goes into them, and most of all, educate the attendees on how and why are DOTs going overall towards 3D? Why are these accurate visuals so essential to build trust on big projects and saving money by communicating earlier? Understand 3D reality models, a new thing, and how those are created. You're seeing them more and more often now. Understand VisSim traffic simulation and how that can be visualized in 3D through an example we showed today. And talk about the budget and understand the differences in products that you can create appropriate to your budget to communicate. I want to focus today on 3D transportation visualization. These are the 3D data products that are becoming more and more available, and 2D products are something that I think we all see often with the aerial photo in the background. It still is a 2D and not a real view that you'd actually see in real life. Public involvement opportunities are out there with this 3D data that's out there, from concept planning all the way through final design and construction. I'll talk about some of those phases of different ways to use products. The target audience, it can be the whole general public, like open to the public, specific people and agencies who are decision makers, focused community groups. It's up to the client, typically a DOT or agency, or whoever's funding the project, to determine that and focus on that. Goal is to honestly show in the way it's actually going to be the benefit and also the impacts of projects, which of course people with transportation are always concerned about new traffic patterns and how that's going to change. And that's where the VisSim, you'll see, comes into play. The budget, we'll see, determines what's feasible. Animation simulation is for bigger projects, bigger budgets. Photo simulation, more appropriate for planning, placing designs in a context, but at a lower cost so people can recognize it and you're not blowing the budget. It's a big difference to see it. As engineers, we're always looking at 2D, picture type of engineering views. Photo simulation is how people actually can see and recognize things. And that's a big priority, is making everybody understand, or as many people as possible understand, what the future is going to look like given a major project, and how to usually get them on board with the benefits. So the different opportunities where it's going to be appropriate to involve the public or involve a target audience, to me that kind of is the same category. You're taking someone who's not an engineer, people who are going to be part of living the project, they're interested in it, or the agencies and groups that are kind of stakeholders. You can start out in the very beginning. You have things like visioning, a technical assistance plan in these community groups that are looking at way into the future. And also they might get involved with influencing, or any town or city has comprehensive plans that they put together, depending on how big the city is or town is, how detailed they sometimes go. But they all have their own comprehensive plan, and that's an appropriate place to use some of this 3D visualization. A big one focus on today is NEPA. So this was signed in 1970, Nixon, and into that's kind of was as a result of an awakening, or more of a concern, especially about impacts of projects environmentally, but also on the social and economic effects. And that's what the law says. You need to look into those alternatives, because underlying everything with transportation is eminent domain. It's the ability to take properties to use it for the public good. And how do you go through a fair process to determine what's actually the public good? That's why this law makes a lot of sense. And that's what is a big part of transportation planning consulting is NEPA and the planning stages. So the next forward in the process where you might have a place is during design, where you've actually got an alternative, and then maybe you're determining all the exact details there, and you have a group that you want to inform in the community about that, and even straight into construction, where you might be communicating how the phasing is going to work, and different construction issues of what's going to go on while it's being built. Now, and yeah, I said eminent domain, and that means the land can be taken for the public good. And because of the history, I'll get into a specific project in a second, the public often has a bias, especially if they do, then it's a time when you might want to use visualization if you can demonstrate that the project is really good, and you want to show them honestly what it looks like and build that trust. So you go into it knowing they might be a little wary of what you're showing, because we are working on the side of building the roads or any of those facilities. So this is the famous example of Baltimore's highway to nowhere. And that's why I bring up the NEPA process, and how you have a process to go through, and that's supposed to ensure that before you start building the alternative, you're not going to run into troubles. And what happened here, construction began on I-170 in 1975, and it was built, this yellow part on this to the right side, and possibly parts over here with that interchange, because as you see, it's heading through there, and halted in 1979. So this whole area straight through this community, through these neighborhoods, what happened over time is that the project, even though it was getting built, it had a huge community blowback, where they didn't like this project. It had a lot of it was impacts to the community, but also environmentally. It was destined to go through here, and kind of through all those things, the project was halted. And so it's the famous highway to nowhere. Now, here it is, and these are Google Earth images here. The MARC parking in 1994. So this highway to nowhere went to here, but there is a MARC station here, and a pretty important stop connecting to Baltimore. The MARC train here, so they had the parking lot in 1994. And here, of course, is the highway to nowhere. Going forward, expanded it, and you can see it's totally full, because it's a good commuter route. So as we start to see opportunities now here to take this and turn it into something that will help the community connect, give economic opportunities through the traffic and getting people in there. So then going forward here to the next iteration forward, I think this is like 2004, or actually this is current. This project expanded even further. See the parking lots all the way to here. And one thing is I actually designed this, this whole expansion here. Then this road connected. I was one of the designers. A lot of people worked on it. And this new parking lot, and then the ramps were all adjusted and a lot of roadway work in order to make this road connect. But what we got now is a large expanse still remaining of the highway to nowhere. And I know, like I said, we designed this, the community was in support, and we visualized this way back, and that was done. And this rest of this area is what people are looking at now. And I went to that opportunities area. So we skip forward to today. There's people working on visioning of what to do with the rest of this now. And it's essentially turning it into more parking garages, businesses, connecting instead of having, non-connected communities here. There's a lot of ideas going on. And this is kind of opportunities that you see that are mixed intent, like in the planning, in a comprehensive planning stage, you're planning for economic benefit, environmental, community benefits. It's not just about transportation. So it's kind of neat. That's how it's evolved with transportation. It started off with as more transportation focused, and then it became more context of what's the community, what is the context of where you're putting all this stuff. And so here we've got this Hub 404 Visioneering, which was a Bentley finalist, a project, and James Clay worked on this, and it was a community group and a visioning type of exercise. And hey, James, are you mic'd in here? I will play this video. Sir. So this is James Clay down in Georgia. He's a visualization and data survey guru. So here you go, James. This is our Bentley finalist.
Excellent. Well, this video was all about, they're going to build a large park over Georgia 400, which is a major highway that runs through Atlanta. And one of the things of course, everybody wants to know is, what's it going to look like when it gets finished? And with your client, there's some specific things you need to go over to make sure you understand their vision. And here they did supply us with a basic model, and then they told us, hey, we want it to look like a Georgia red bank clay where the people are going to run up and down the trails and things. So that's we took their basic model, texturized it, put in the plants and everything. They didn't really have a landscape plan, so we kind of came up with it our own. But nonetheless, we were trying to show existing conditions that we were capturing in the field. Our survey teams with mobile scanning and things like that were capturing the existing conditions, and then taking this proposed model, putting it on top of those conditions, texturizing it and everything, and then making a fly through so that we could really get a feel for what it looks like. MARTA was the major transportation system that runs through Atlanta that was included in this. And here's a screenshot, part of the video shows MARTA was really concerned, what are we going to see out of our windows? So again, back to the vision of the client. And here we were letting it just scroll through, looking out the windows of the proposed MARTA station and showing exactly what they would see outside and how it would kind of interact with that whole park view. Again, I can't say visioning enough. It's just important to get in touch with your client and understand what they're looking at. Do they have hand sketches and things like that ready for you, so that you'll understand what they need to see? What we like to try to do is go ahead and get the whole site storyboarded. So if you can get the basic information from them for hand sketching, landscaping, things like that, and then you can storyboard all this information together. Do they want narration? How long is that going to last? Let's get all those things up front. And then once you have all that information, start building the world. On some of this, you'll see that we're using real video footage, and we're blending in the model with that. That's using some specialized camera tracking where you can do that. But again, how real do they need it to look? What is the final goal? And you have to balance that with your client with, we can make it real as you want to, but it costs a lot more money. Just putting in the basic textures and things of a blank model does take quite a while. So we really need to decide what you're going to receive from your client and go over that with them. I guess what we need to learn from that whole video, it is, it's powerful. You can see what's going on. The client got a lot out of it, and they were able to see what the final product looked like. And they took this to try to get more funding for the project, actually. Is just making sure that you understand and the client understands what they're going to end up with, and what they're looking for is you understand that up front. And put the video in front of them quite often. Any world that you're building or anything like that, make sure you put that in. Don't go so far that, hey, I'm almost 90% complete before I start showing the client. So give them time to comment and things. Just have to build all that into your budget and into your time frames, just to make sure that your client ends up with what they need to see, where they can show, in this case, to the public and or stakeholders, end up what they want.
And it's so many details that you threw in here architecturally with people, and the again, it's like saying it's not just about transportation. This is about community, and it's kind of a wild idea, but that's how ideas begin. Like this, it's going to warp or change to something, and the concept is there of connecting the community. Very cool project. And so you were mentioning the matching with your drone camera, and that's the technique you used right here. So
yep. And actually they wanted to see, there was a major stakeholder that had a condominium. He owned one of the condominiums at the top of that tower right there. So he wanted to know what it looked like from it was going to look like from his deck. So we got a drone in the area and took some video footage to show him, hey, well, this is what it'll look like once they finish it. So he was satisfied.
Excellent. Awesome. And James, continue to chime in whenever. It's that part of that project. As I go in the technical side here, we'll get abstract for a second. Is like you did the visualization products. You also did an enormous amount of data collection on the 3D side via drone and LiDAR.
That's correct. Yeah. So to help us build that existing world, that reality capture, we were contracted to do all that first, and then set the propose on top of it. Right.
And it gives a lot of, like, even if they change down the road, that gives them data to work with as new designs, new ideas come into the field of view. And so data is so important, that you're showing something accurate, at least based in reality, even though we're not saying, it's not a exact science, it still is an accurate science that we're trying to do. So
right.
you start
That's
with
a real
that.
good point.
Yeah.
Because the accuracy is, it is survey grade. So, which is a very high accuracy. So what you're seeing is, a lot of, it's what is going to be, at least until they changed the design, of course, something they saw they wanted to move around, but what we were producing and what we captured, survey grade information.
Right on. Yeah. And then whenever we're any project, we got to take the visualization technique and apply it to it. And then there's some decision makers, and then they are going to give us valuable feedback. And one of it could be just, hey, the whole thing, like in the Highway to Nowhere, would have been good to get that feedback that it just wasn't going to work out. And that whole section, we wouldn't have built it. It's just incredible how much money you can save by communicating more and figuring out the right solution. And you go back and then you say, even this could be this is the cycle that anyone in consulting knows that we do all the time. You're basically selling the ability to get your data, visualize it, and make decisions and communicate, but even if it's just a plan sheet. So it's the same idea when you try to visualize it. We try to make it data driven, and the techniques are applied. And then if many times something will be noticed, and then the change gets made. So you might even decide that you need to change the focus of what you're looking at, like in terms of the visual product. It's like James mentioned on his different things that were very focused. They wanted the guy looking out the window, et cetera, like the MARC station. So whenever we're doing it, if you think about this, you're going to have a chance of getting your budget figured out and seeing how it's going to work out. by putting time and money into these different parts of the process. So in the bigger picture, and that is that the data, and James has experience with a lot of the 3D data on survey and visualization end. And you know, my experience is more on the design side of being a design engineer, transportation engineer, and the whole DOTs are transitioning their design software towards not, you know, 3D. Yes, if you were me 20 years ago, you were kind of doing 3D with inroads, but the completeness of it wasn't as complete as over the years go by. And then these tools get more and more sophisticated for 3D and more intuitive to use, especially to teach somebody new. And they're transitioning forward. So in the big picture, you can look up everybody online, and you see that they all have a 3D initiative from the federal highway down to all the different DOTs. So even though they might still require, some of them, they're eventually going to get to Open Roads Designer, but still many of them now are still requiring GeoPack or inroads as what they say is their deliverable. And you could go state by state and just look up their websites, find out what they're at. They usually have that clearly stated. But in those versions that you can use with inroads and GeoPack, you should know that the Open Roads technology is in those as any version from SS4 to SS10. That's the green area here. So it's pretty complicated, the different versions that are going on. And you basically have the old school, a hybrid, and a new, more completely 3D environment. As we're looking into the future here, we see the reality mesh as not just for a visualization product. It's definitely a great thing to get a 3D. Let me play this video for you. But even in a design scenario, if you're designing, and here's with Georgia's Open Roads Designer workspace, all of their utilities from their standards are modeled. And so their pipes and their inlets, all of these components, the various pieces with the road, they have standards that you can use. And here you can see when you put a reality mesh behind that, which is a tool that is coming about, it's coming of age really in terms of existing data. Instead of lines and points and maybe shapes, you're talking about a reality mesh. And keeping that in the back of your mind of even using that in design is going to be something you'll see. But it's definitely the key in visualization. And you'll know on Google Earth, you can turn on the terrains or the buildings, and you basically get a reality mesh if they have the data there. And I believe that's just going to repeat that. Okay, so now getting to the product that really can educate you on the whole big picture of putting all this stuff together is recently we worked on a simulation video for US 278 Hilton Head. So these materials, this is a big deal project. So you'll see when you see the video, it's quite a large change, and there's a lot of interested people throughout the corridor. So for this public hearing, they actually had it in person in the brief sort of, they had a good window with COVID was settled down, but they also of course had it online. So this just recently, beginning to mid-July, I think beginning of July got released. And how you go into it, they have an online virtual room, like a virtual public hearing room. So if you just search this, you'll be able to pull it up, and you'll see you go into a little room and you can click on different things. I just wanted to mention, it was funny to me, or I guess kind of nice or affirming in why we're doing simulation, that like a video that was in there that was the alternative analysis video. When I clicked on that, it had it had 10 views until I hit it, and then it had 11 views. So the simulation video, it's got 2,692 to be exact. And it also seemed to have another link that had another 1,000 views. So you were talking like a magnitude of 40 times of the exposure that video is getting, because it's understandable and it shows so much. And actually, pictures from the simulation video are in the alternative analysis. But I understand too, the alternative analysis is not, people want to see the selected alternative. So that's a little unfair, I'm doing this. But they talk about the whole big picture, and it's probably more boring too, let's face it. But that's what you want to do, engage people. So it's kind of cool that it's up there online. I would encourage you to look at that room, the virtual meeting rooms, and how these things are presented online. Now, before I actually get to the video, got one more slide about technical details. And then that way, when we watch the video, we can get an idea of and kind of talk about some of those with more understanding coming into it. So we said you have your 3D design area, and we already kind of talked about how that can be. So I'm being general here. It could be anything. In this project, it was Geopack. And then you got 3D visualization data, like those cool people and plants and things that you don't see in a plan sheet. They're hanging out in their own data type, and they can usually come in to the rendering engine. So the rendering engine, that's where everything ends up at the end of the process. And we use LumenRT. We also used Blender and other things too. Basically, LumenRT was the key here, though. And over on the side here, you got the traffic simulation. So that's typically presented 2D and not, you might not even see, VisSim is used, but then typically they might do it and just show a 2D view. To do the 3D fly around view that we're doing requires you push all that into the rendering engine. So you can't just do it in VisSim. But this is a traffic simulation. And Pong Zhu worked on that portion. He might be here. I think he's joining later. So if we have questions about that, he'll be here at the end. And that bears mentioning that we're really collaborating heavily. Like I'm kind of in this area with the 3D design stuff, and I'm also using Concept Station to serve up to Pong and VisSim those 3D links that really are directly coordinated with the design data. So they're in 3D, and he can then take that stuff, attach connectors and do a lot of his magic, which is very quick turnaround that you kind of put this together. We did do this project not as a true, we had data and we put data in the VisSim, but it wasn't to the level of where some, thorough VisSim analysis, because it was here for the purpose of showing the traffic realistically. So it wasn't the sole, I guess there were other traffic simulations going on by other folks on the project, but Pong came on to help this for the rendering. So it sends that to LumenRT, and essentially everything comes out coordinated. And also, not to mention, you can get help from people who are landscape architects, and WISA was doing some of that, and they might get some visualization data with the plants together or whatnot. So definitely brings a lot of people together, and James was bringing it home basically, not only actually with the rendering engine and the final product, but also with that reality mesh creation, which we can talk about when we see the video. You could call that 3D visualization data on this picture. So let's go ahead and crank this up. Now let's listen to some of the audio in the beginning here before we talk. Nice scene. James, can you hear the audio?
Yes.
All right.
I can talk a little bit about some of that if you'd like. Just one thing that was kind of interesting to me about this project is that, you know, Cyrus and Pong and Weiss and everybody had put together a lot of information to provide it to our team so that we could start assembling the final renders and things. And so big bridges, long road, lots of big intersections and things like that. But then when we started watching some of the, and again, make sure you bring your video to your client early so that they can make comments. One of the comments was, hey, you know, down there near the first bridge, we've got a boardwalk that's going to be right along the edge of the waterway there. And we're not really showing that.
Yeah.
Not really showing that. And how can we draw attention to that? Like, oh, wow, how are we going to do that? Because it's really kind of small. It's long, but it's thin and small. When you're flying above this multi-mile project, it's kind of hard to see. So
yeah,
that's why we started off and said, well, we'll just put a jogger early in the morning on the boardwalk. And that in the end, the client really liked that because, hey, look, the public can see there is an interaction, a place that they can access this whole area with. And then we put pedestrians and things on the bridge in the walkway that Cyrus has made sure that he had modeled out of the design. So that kind of all went together. And you can see Pong's traffic simulation running in the background.
Yeah. I'll pause for a second here. Yeah, in the pedestrian, that's a totally new facility. So that's a huge benefit that we're stressing. And then you had the narration in the beginning. So let's play how we open it up here.
This project begins in Bluffton at the intersection of US 278.
I'll turn her up for a little bit.
Between Moss Creek Drive and Salt Marsh Drive, the project would not make any changes to the roadway, but would add bicycle and pedestrian facilities along US 278. Beginning at the
And if you watch the traffic, you'll see that it's doing real things. It'll change lanes and things. If somebody's not used to that this sim, it is pretty impressive.
Exactly, yeah. The traffic all populated. So all these 3D motions I served out to with Concept Station. I'm not there's tricks to it, believe me, and getting into the details and the weeds, we just don't have time to do that today. But the basic thing is Concept Station, serve these in 3D. And the natural thing that VisSim does, oh yeah, there we go. See that?
Yep.
I love that stuff. It's
a broken down car. Yeah.
Yeah. Random things will happen. And then the cars will act the way they should when they see random things.
And yes, hi, this is Pong.
Hi, Pong.
Hi, Cyrus. Hi, James. You're absolutely right. It's VisSim is the strength is traffic operation. So visualization software. So that's the strength of it. And the vehicle to vehicle interaction, just like what you saw, that a car behind a kind of stuck car trying to make a lane change to go over. That's one. Also, the interaction between traffic control devices like stopping at stop bars and yielding at incoming traffic and stopping at signal intersections. And if we have transit vehicles and pedestrian bicycles, we will, as we do in urban settings, we'll see a lot of interaction between traffic and transit, and also ped and bike as well. So that's the strength, kind of the reason of bringing in VisSim into this effort.
Indeed, it does. There's no way to animation. Near the end, I have a video I'll show that doesn't use VisSim. And you can see some of the stuff about that and how it's different, and definitely not as good. So yeah, we've integrated these things, and I wanted to we'll keep this running as we see. Oh, this is a good moment. Talk, the trees and the details, and things like the signs for the communities are really important. So you have to allow the budget for those things. The reality mesh and the existing environment, James, you created that with drone flights, and then also aerial photo as we get further and away from the site.
That's right. Yep. And the good thing is, because everything today is geo-referenced, that goes together pretty easily. Our UAVs all have GPS. The the aerial lights are GPS, our survey data on the ground. And so because we georeferenced everything, we can just assemble that into a data set, a database that you as an engineer use to make your design on. So it makes this easier than it was in the past. And like you were talking about earlier, the tools continue to get better. So this will be, as we go further, it'll be a lot easier than what this one was.
Yeah, yeah. You did a great job to you kind of put it together with an even larger aerial photo, and then that's why in the distance you kind of get a feel for if you know the area, you know how the water kind of hits the coast, and people will recognize where they are. It's all coming from actual data, and again with the data driven. And some things are like you'll get a very good sense here that we have trees closer to the project that are coming in. We're modeling those with visualization data of trees, but other trees are actually from the reality mesh, and you'll see those as a little less detailed, but still recognizable in form somewhat. So yeah, and then more details of these street lights and the community signs and things that. And again, there's so many little water details that happen along the corridor that you capture, and the homes, all reality mesh. It just, if that wasn't there, I think it'd be a big difference. It'd be harder to create all that. I'm back like 20 years ago or whatnot. I remember having to create my existing, whatever I had to show, not just create, like, literally draw it up and create it. So.
And also, one thing that was good about it, because we showed it so often, is that the client was able to call out things like, "Hey, the crosswalks need to change." Cyrus had noted that even in their design, they had drawn the crosswalks, and they said we didn't have an area in the middle for them to stop because of where they had the crosswalks. Because the design engineers had looked at the video early on, they said, "Wait a minute, we've got to make a design change." And Cyrus went back and updated his design to. He had used their design, but then he was making it 3D. They had not really done it in full 3D. And so then he updated that information. So it's powerful. And the public, they wanted to make sure the public could see this U-turn. Hey, can you go back and change your camera? Yeah.
Yeah. That's a totally different. Now you guys got to go online to see it if you want to really get the audio, but she's describing the various changes. And look, this is, you really see the traffic operations of this sim.
Right turn lanes from US 278
So
stay the same.
And that narration aspect of it, getting that out early and knowing what your client wants to see, that narration, if you can get that on the board early for you, when you get the client's vision, get hand sketches or whatever their proposed ideas, look at the design, are there landscape plans, what's the final vision, how accurate, how detailed does it not need to be. Accuracy is the goal here. We are trying to give an accurate view of what the final is, but how detailed did that information need to be? In areas where they're going to zoom the camera in, let's put a little bit more detail. If it's not going to be zoomed in, we don't have to worry about it as much. Get that all put on a storyboard, get that narration up front so that you're not making a lot of changes at the end of the job, trying to figure out what they, changing your camera views and things because the narrator is talking about something that your camera is not looking at. It's important. If you do get a chance to go see the video, while you're listening to the narration, the camera follows what she's talking about. So that really helps with getting that in front of the public.
Definitely. Yeah. And we get that. I'll move forward. And you brought up the great kind of lead into what I'm talking about now is the actual design, what they give you as opposed to what you see in that model, and how how we're going. I gave you a basic overview of it, but there's a transition. So everyone's into 3D modeling to a certain point, even in planning, because the requirement is to show the impacts, cut and fill lines, what's impacted. You have to set a profile, and the best way to do it is the model. But if you see here, this is how the models kind of at the rougher stage come together. They're just pieces that are mostly concerned with impacts. They're not concerned with everything connecting perfectly like a final design would be, an absolute final design. And so here's to show the difference. What when I took their 2D design, I overlaid it. I'll go back and forth a little here. I overlay with that. I saw all the things that were not the same. And for a lot of straight sections, it was all good. But these intersections got really pretty detailed and tricky, and ways to model those elements that are totally not included. Like this curve is quite a curved island that goes out there. And so the methods I'm going with basically you grab this area and you just kind of pull elevations and draw lines. I call it the skeleton. See that level called skeleton? And then I'll take the 2D and drape it on there. So then you have to actually model the various things like a curve, etc., and then fill it in. So it actually was the method I used. I liked how I used their models directly, but it was time consuming in that recreating the most difficult things is what I ended up having to sort of do. Here's another intersection. But it's worth it if you could say that you really, and at the end of the day, our model was an exact replica of their design, except for perhaps that one crosswalk or it's tiny things that they wanted to change. But it really is supposed to be the same as the design that's in the NEPA documents. So you've got same thing, a lot of details getting filled in. So this time factor here is a big influence on cost, and there's a lot of opportunity if you just look at the future of this cost going down, because what I'm on a parallel track, something I'll teach you about and maybe do another seminar about is the design side of 3D modeling, just thinking about design. And you do model these things. And there's also other tools just for planning. I'll give you guys the concept station. It seems like if only that would be the acceptable, I guess, way to do NEPA, that would be fantastic, because it puts all the intersections together for you in a visual form and stripes and things like that. So there's a lot of developing technologies, emerging technologies that are gonna cut the time down on this very tedious process I had to do here. And I like my expertise is pretty high too. So it's not as if you can just have any brand new EIT do this. So we want to find ways to make it quicker, and we are every day. And again, the data you start with depends on what you have to do. So considering that is important, especially let's say that you have the opportunity to do the modeling and do the visualization. And so in this case, CDM did the geopack and we visualized it. So now let's talk about the budget and transition here. So that I kind of got into why it's such a high budget and a lot of work, and was involved by us on all the different phases of it. Now that's because we had basically the highest budget type of product, which is a video animation that has existing and proposed. So even in our case, we have to say this is not Hollywood on that large project, because the tools are meant, like we're using the same tools, honestly, that they would use in these Hollywood type of productions, because that's where the stuff is at. You render things in these rendering engines that are built to do it fast, and that's what's out there. So it's built to do it fast in terms of rendering images, but putting everything together, that can take a lot of time and hardware and everything else. So video and animation, you got the biggest chance in simulation of overrunning your hardware or time capabilities. So a lot of times on a smaller project that's still pretty large enough to demand some communication, we're gonna use still images, photo simulation, and putting that in a photo, but a still image. And even though it's the not so good is you have to focus on one area, that can be good, and you're framing what you want to show them. So we find these really effective. Over my experience, I've done many photo simulations. We do them with Google Earth or Bing images where you have to have your watermark. That's how their license works. If you're on Google Earth Pro or Bing, you leave their watermark on. Ground photos that we take, that people actually take of our own, often are used. And drone photos are the really biggest emerging thing that gives you the best advantages to see a larger area and to get a real photo that you have full, control over where you take it and what you look at. So then using Photoshop in combination, that basically gives you the opportunity to paint. And if anyone uses the clone tool in Photoshop, you can make things disappear and you make things appear and take pieces of photos. So you can do a lot of artistic, and the word I'm going for is, it's an optical illusion. It's artistry that fills in the blanks from what you have modeled to giving you a final product, but still, because you have modeled and you have some stuff behind it, some data, you're not just, making, it's not just a painting. Because when I first started this way back, it was like 99, and I was doing a research, my thesis and a research paper for State Highway, talking about just visualization in general. And they were like comparing it to just pure artist renderings in terms of like just getting into it there. So you might see watercolors of something, but here it's got a little bit of art and it's got modeling also. So it's just more accurate in general. And the process is pretty, here's just an example real quick to give you the technical background. If you pull out a Google Earth image and you've got 3D buildings in there, you take your data and put a camera in MicroStation, and you can calibrate it and line it up to the best that you can, and then take your proposed model and put that in there to show the change. So quick look at in MicroStation, your cameras have just a precise every bit of information that a camera has to it. So this projection, when you calibrate it and you overlay it, you get to the point, again, like where you see the existing 3D overlay in the photo, and then you just turn on your model. Sometimes, here's a very close-up ground photo example. And the data is available, but perhaps not in tons of detail, but still enough that I can go by the plans and model every post, pretty much the way it is in the plan, the guardrail to the standard. And so that's just what I modeled. I didn't model anything else. Beyond that, though, I kind of tweaked it because the photo matches are not always perfect because your data limitation. You see it kind of moved. It's not the same shape. I had to tweak that to match the photo because we're keeping existing ground here. But these guardrails, the community wanted to have an idea of what it would look like here, and they have the brown aesthetic treatment to kind of make it blend in more, and wanted to show that. They have a big installation of utilities and electric and I think water supply related stuff in here, big cabinets, and it has to be protected. So they wanted to make sure the community saw this, understood it was needed, and that it would look decent and functional. Here's one you'll see a lot as a drone photo and of a interchange. So you get always a really good view of how a whole interchange works and the surrounding buildings and whatnot, as opposed to the up-down. You're not going to see the bridge. It just isn't going to, if you're not an engineer, it's not going to be, it's easy to tell how the bridge is elevated and how everything ties together and where it is on the earth. Here's an example of that we did in South Carolina. And just going to move through on just more examples of photo simulation. Another variety here is when you've got your terrain data and you got, so for Maryland, they have LiDAR terrain data, and they also have pretty good high resolution aerial photos, all available to download. You put those together and you make it's also a reality mesh, but it's a different kind. It's just made up of a flat. You can tell the trees are plastered to the ground, but you still see the relief. You can see that giant creek canyon there going in. And so this is the existing bridge. To rebuild that, you're going to, we had two options we were just looking at in this image. Oops. One of them is to basically do a buy bridge where you do this one and then you replace this one, but in the same place where the existing one was. So that's a dual bridge. And that means you can stay a little closer. The other option is the more simple, and probably what they would end up doing, if I was to guess, is just replace the whole thing to the side. And then the thing they have to consider is that it's going to be a bigger wall. So you can kind of show people in a very early planning, different options. And this would be focused towards agencies, really. All right. So now, this is another example of reality mesh and interchange, but this time in animation. This was modeled with Concept Station. I was talking about Concept Station earlier to tell you that I really think that at the end of the day, it's going to be used more and more in planning to iron out what alternatives visually and acceptable, with the politically acceptable, because it's very good at putting the stripes and your intersections all together. And your bridges have pretty simple methods to put them in here. Now, I did animate the traffic, but not with VisSim. This is with LumenRT, where you can put cars and put them at frequencies. So it is fairly good and realistic, but it's limited because you have to see how those just appear. Everyone is represented as a strip of people moving. So these guys can be parked. And so you can do a lot with LumenRT to animate traffic and just show people how the flow and the direction of flow. But as soon as they start interacting, you run out of, so you can try to do some trickery. So you just show angles where that doesn't happen. It turns into a lot of work if you think about it, instead of just saying, hey, I'm going to throw a VisSim on this whole area, and then I can do what I need to do, and the cars will always be moving in a nice way. But of course, again, if you only had to show just a straight on, they do have varying speed and different things like that. But when I tried to work out how to do these diverging points where decisions have to be made, that's not what LumenRT can do by itself. So we'll let this guy finish out and just show you. This is Concept Station again. It's got really good standard creation tools and all of these elements, like your basic things that you would need. So really, if a transportation planning project, it's a great tool to use. You're looking at different options and things like that. And we are using it with some of our clients, but it still isn't an industry standard for planning or anything close to that, which it could be. It could be more, and I think it will. Okay, we've reached the closing sort of question and discussion slide, and here's where I show you some of my birds. The duck has vision that has evolved. The tools that it uses are on the side of its head. Now their eyeballs can move around. So imagine they get an incredibly wide view where they can see where any predator is coming from any angle. And that's what their vision's all about. And on the other hand, the owl, that's the one who's really got the eyes that I think are fascinating. Although the duck is pretty cool, but an owl, it's got eyeballs that are not actually moving. They're just cones. And so if you see an owl, and this guy was hanging out in the day, you'll see that it actually has to twist its whole head around to look. So it's almost ominously, it's always looking forward, but it can twist its head like in a complete 360, which is it's pretty amazing thing when you actually see that owl spin its head in 360. And the whole point is that, you know, these tools have a purpose, understand the purpose, and it's ultimately going to be fundamental to use these tools to make our projects understood, move forward, and have people work in cohesion and trust each other more. So it's kind of a group thing with what we're doing, but these are individual tools, and that's visualized with a purpose. So I think that we'll see more opportunities to do this. The education is going to be key, and education from the production side right up to the side of the purpose and the users. One more thing I say is just on projects where you have a public involvement wing, you have a lot of different specialties working together, and that's the key, is that we're all working as a team, from the designers to the visualization production team to the public involvement team. So it does take a lot of communication and planning about what you're gonna create. Yeah, final note too is listening to the production guys is very important in that process. So like we have noted, figuring out as quick as you can a vision for your product definitely helps make it a better budget, more streamlined process.